This week, opposition to school choice coming from red state Republicans, the latest trend of school board members swearing in on inappropriate children's books instead of the Bible, and rare bipartisan pushback from Congress on Michelle Obama's school lunch changes. These stories and much more coming up on The Lion Week in Review. Welcome into this week's edition of The Lion Week in Review. It's a weekly look at the culture, the courts, your state capitol, and your kids. I'm Chris Stigall. Now, let's meet the panel, some of the folks behind all the stories you read at readlion.com. Michael Ryan is executive editor of The Lion, and Josh Mann, its managing editor. Gentlemen, welcome both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
School choice is obviously something that we talk about a lot at The Lion, and I'm particularly interested in a story this week that comes from Republican, sometimes I guess you'd call it rare Republican opposition. People don't associate Republicans as being opposed to school choice, but in Missouri you have uncovered, apparently on social media anyway, some of that opposition. I'd love to hear more about this because I think this is a part of the story that doesn't get talked about a lot.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, school choice has had a ton of momentum lately, even in Missouri and especially in the GOP. But Senator Elaine Gannon, who hadn't posted on Twitter for 3 years, did post a reply to school choice advocate Corey DeAngelis, who wanted to put her and two other Republican senators who voted against school choice previously on the record about Doug Ritchie's universal school choice bill that he's introduced. And she came out of the woodwork, tweeted for the first time in 3 years, "This is Senator Elaine Gannon," she wrote, "and no, I do not support universal school choice bill." Now, just a week ago, she announced that she would not be running for re-election next year. So critics thought, well, this is kind of an odd way to sort of disembark and leave,
How weird, but gave no context, Michael, as to why she opposes it. I mean, this is something I think a lot of people ought to understand. I think people assume this is partisan, strictly partisan. It's not strictly partisan. There's some gray blurring of lines in opposition here.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have to look. You have to look at the money. I mean, they say follow the money, and she got big support from unions, and in particular the teachers' union. So you have to wonder if that had some influence on her position or her voting. It was also interesting that she would do this on the way out, kind of thumb her nose on the way out, when really she had nothing to gain by it. And then she went so far out of her way that she had to take a defibrillator to her account, social media account, and wake that up so that she could do it. I mean, it's just an odd thing to do.
It is strange that Missouri, it's not alone certainly, but Missouri is one of those Republican-controlled legislatures. It has a Republican governor, and yet the concept of universal school choice is slow, if not dead stopped often in Jefferson City. It's not the only state that's having this issue, but what are you hearing might be Republican opposition in the legislature to this?
Yeah, I think some of the Republicans who have opposed it, and there's only been a handful who've voted against it, but there's others who aren't exactly supporting it. I think some of it is the influence of teachers' union. When these Republicans represent rural areas, often in those places, small towns, for example, the school district's the largest employer. The superintendent has the ear of their local representative, and is going to be saying school choice hurts the public school, et cetera. They're teachers union talking points, which aren't necessarily true. But I think that holds a lot of sway with these lawmakers.
Yeah, the statistics don't bear it out, Michael, just as a matter of fact. In states like Florida, more rural places like some of Florida's rural communities, they have not seen a drop-off in attendance. In fact, rural communities largely like their public school, and they don't really suffer the consequences that they imagine might come.
Yeah, when my kids were young, we sent them to a public school. And I wrote a column in a newspaper about the fact that I wish I could have chosen the school, but I didn't have a choice in it, right? And it's truly about freedom. I mean, the whole issue comes down to freedom. And I think if you're against freedom, you're really risking being on the wrong side of history.
Meanwhile, in Wisconsin, there's a court case that had made its way through the Supreme Court there, Josh, on this similar subject, school choice. What's going on there?
That's right. This is essentially a progressive liberal super PAC had sued, alleging that school choice defunds public schools and isn't sufficiently accountable to the state superintendent. Now, Wisconsin has had school choice for a long time in some small, very specific programs, one in Milwaukee and also a couple of others. And so it's not the first time it's been targeted by the left. The super PAC was hoping to take it directly to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, no, we're not going to hear this. And the super PAC has vowed to sue in a lower court. But essentially they argued that the programs which give families money to send their children to better or different schools violates the state constitution. And this is one of these arguments you will hear from the teachers union and sometimes from legal entities, that a state constitution says you can't use public funds outside of a public entity like a school. In other words, you can't take public funds and use it on a private school. The Supreme Court has ruled in a few cases, essentially undermining that legal argument.
That being the United States Supreme Court.
That's right.
In fact, I think we've talked about it in previous episodes, Michael, that it wasn't it also a Missouri case, something about playground surfacing or something like that. Yeah. So the Supreme Court seems, at least as currently constituted, to support what Josh was just saying. If you're going to take taxpayer dollars, you can't discriminate against a school because it is faith-based. Is that about right?
Yeah, and this battle for school choice is being waged on a number of fronts, and the latest seems to be the courts, where they're turning the lawfare, which you see in politics, onto the education establishment. It reminds me of an old joke. Stop me if you've heard it, but these three guys come upon a magic lamp, and so they get one wish each. First guy says, well, my neighbor has this beautiful cottage. I'd like one just like it. Poof. Next guy says, well, my neighbor has this beautiful sports car. I'd like one just like it. Poof. Third guy says, my neighbor has this beautiful prize pig. I want you to kill his pig. This is basically what the issue is. And it's not that I want something as nice as my neighbor. I want my neighbor's prize killed.
Right.
And so, and in fact, in my newspaper career, I had colleagues tell me they frankly thought that school choice, private schools, religious schools ought to be illegal, and public schools ought to be the only option.
Isn't that amazing? So as for you, Josh, the Chicago schools, you've also written about them. They're not, Wisconsin's not alone. The Chicago, in fact, Board of Education has sort of declared open combat on school choice.
That's right. They have something, they've got a program where parents can, their children can apply to get in these selective schools. So even though they have a neighborhood school, they can apply and get into basically a better high school. And they've had the program for some time, but now they're saying, well, there's problems with how equitable these schools are. It's when they were set up, they thought it would actually help desegregate, their words, some of the schools. And over time, they're saying now it's causing too much segregation. So they're talking about doing away with it. And the Chicago Board of Education, they are elected positions, but the mayor, Brandon Johnson, has had to appoint about half of that board just recently. By 2027, the whole board will be elected, but essentially half of the board right now is serving at the pleasure of the mayor.
Oh, wow.
And so and many of them have kind of a social justice agenda. But the parents don't really find this a very equitable move, and the parents of these kids are really upset that their children's school could be taken away from them.
Isn't that an interesting dynamic too, Michael, that you're seeing elections in urban cities like Chicago, when voters are actually given the choice, they seem to be rejecting a lot of this, but the mayor digging in and making political appointments in the interim, resisting the will of the parents.
Yeah, there's a real disconnect there. This is, you've heard of No Child Left Behind. This is No Child Gets Ahead.
Right.
So this is the new standard, apparently, which is really bizarre in Chicago because Chicago public schools are almost 90% students of color. So you're really hurting your target audience, really, if that's what you're after.
And the test scores in Chicago public schools across the board are pretty poor. And so you would hope that parents and students would have access to better schools, better education, that you could create maybe this environment of even competition, of giving students the opportunity to progress in schools, to perform and be held accountable.
One thing I noticed during the Gulf War era was that we always described, it was almost like a law in journalism, that if you talked about Saddam Hussein's Republican Guard, you had to put elite in front of it. And so I looked around and I thought, we're not putting elite on anything else because in our society, elite is a 4-letter word.
Yeah.
It's become a dirty word.
Isn't that something? Similar kind of a neighboring story is out of Pennsylvania this week at the Lion. Interesting, the decision here, public school buses, as I understand it, being used for after-school faith-based activities. Is that about right?
That's about right, but actually the buses were owned by a ministry, so they were private
not public
transport vehicles that were painted yellow. Pennsylvania has some peculiar laws about whether something counts as a school bus or not, and if it does, there's some hurdles to jump through.
Who gets to define that, by the way? Who decides? Is that the state that decides what a school bus is?
I think, a state statute that has to do with it, but what happened was this group called Joy-El Ministries, one of their buses got pulled over by a trooper, and it was supposedly an impromptu vehicle inspection. Now, they question how impromptu it was. They think maybe they were being targeted. And so the patrolman had gone down a list of things that were wrong, how they weren't complying with the law. For example, it needed to be painted National School Bus yellow, which, by the way, they say it was, and that there were other rules that they weren't following. Now, essentially, they sued in 2015, this ministry did. It just now got resolved in a 4-3 decision, and essentially they were vindicated. It was a victory for the ministry. They were complying with state law, and they think that actually they were targeted because of their religious status. One other thing to note here is that this ministry was providing religious education to public school students in what's called a released time program. So a parent can approve their child to be released during the school day for instruction, and so Joy-El would come, pick up your kids, take them to where they needed to go. So that's what the ministry was doing with the vehicles. And so they felt like maybe they were being targeted because some people didn't like that they were offering religious instruction.
Michael, this takes on a new complex and maybe kind of dark, because the way I read this is not a government agency targeting this school. This is law enforcement that's targeting this school potentially, which is something we haven't really seen to date.
Well, I think too, if you put your best face on this, it's overzealousness.
Yeah.
And it's also an inability to keep up with the quickly evolving landscape of education. Mm-hmm. I mean, we're just trying to keep everything in this public education box, and then they misapply the law on school bus, how it's supposed to be formatted inside and out, colored and everything. And the court said they plainly misapplied that law to what is essentially a private vehicle, which makes you wonder, does the law enforcement agency or do the school district, do they have attorneys too? Because the court found it pretty easy, at least the majority did.
Also, another kind of, I guess, challenge, or if you want reversal inside schools, is Michelle Obama, the former First Lady, made a lot of headlines years ago in trying to change up what kids ate at school. Now you have some legislative moves to counter that, Josh.
Yeah, that's right. And so in the House of Representatives, they easily passed a bill that would put whole milk back in the free and reduced lunch program. So maybe some parents didn't know it wasn't in there, but
This is which state again? I'm sorry.
this is actually U.S. Congress.
Oh, the whole House of
Yeah,
Representatives
that's right.
out of D.C.
Yeah.
Okay.
In fact, it passed 330 to 99. It had bipartisan support.
Wow.
But essentially, in 2012, Michelle Obama, as part of an effort to reduce childhood obesity, was campaigning against whole milk in school lunches, and at the same time, Congress had essentially passed something that would remove it. So only skim milk and one other option for kids in schools. Clearly, parents have supported this. A lot of parents think that whole milk is more nutritious, and a number of the lawmakers who supported this, that was their argument. Look, this will fill kids up better. It's more nutritious.
Sure.
And by the way, do we really need the government to tell us not to?
Big dairy,
our kids
Michael.
milk?
Big dairy wins the day. It's rare anymore. You get bipartisan support for anything in government.
Yeah, it's an utter victory.
I see what you did there.
Yeah, well, it just strikes me as odd that we would put milk on the blame list for obesity. I mean, I can't tell you how much milk I drank as a child.
Sure.
And if it was that bad, I should be the whale by now, but I'm not. And it's just silly to think that obesity is being blamed by whole milk. In fact, one of the parents says, or one of the articles, I think it was a journalist, said, House Republicans and many Democrats are pointing to research that they say shows fat obtained from milk is more nutritious than previously believed. So it may not be the boogeyman everybody thought. But I want you to remember one name in this. That's Representative Tom Tiffany, Republican of Wisconsin. He's one of my new heroes because he's making sure that chocolate milk is included in this.
I love it. Huge dairy state, of
I'd
course,
second
Wisconsin. Land of cheese, right? Turning to what has also been just almost a constant weekly, if not biweekly, certainly monthly cacophony of stories out there, Josh, is biological males competing as women and defeating women in competition. You got another one.
That's right. This one comes out of New York, where a biological male set a new women's track and field record in the 300-meter sprint. This is at the university level. Interestingly, this is a biological male who identified as a woman and beat all of the women in the competition, set a record, but apparently would have only placed 41st out of 42 at the same meet had he competed against those of his same biological sex. And so, of course, advocates for fairness in women's sports have come out and said, here's another example of how we're undermining women's sports.
Michael, this is not going away. It seems this is another one of those envelope-pushing stories. The question is, how are people responding? It seems certain legislatures are dealing with it state by state, but obviously New York, maybe not.
Well, I talked about history a minute ago, and you need to think about history and what legacy this era is leaving. Major League Baseball had the era of asterisk and steroids. And now we need something bigger than an asterisk. We need an asteroid for this because we're going to have a lot of asterisks on some of these records that biological men are setting right now. And you have to think, how long is this going to last? And if it doesn't last, how are we going to reconcile what happened and what happened to the girls and the women involved? And what if the biological males detransition? Yes. Do they still have the women's record? I think it was really important what one journalist said. Women will have to spend years getting these men's times stripped. The women who won will eventually be acknowledged in record books, but will never get back the stolen experience of standing atop the podium. That's a legacy.
Huge. Meanwhile, Josh, the stories continue. This is becoming a new trend with swearing in school board members and presidents on stacks of adult-themed books, supposedly for children. This is a new trend instead of the Bible, I guess.
Yes, and so on our last episode, we discussed the example out of Pennsylvania. I think it was a Philly area school district.
Bucks County, I believe, yeah.
Fairfax County Public Schools had a swearing-in ceremony for their 12 school board members, and at least 2 of them chose to go the same route. One, a book that is sometimes it's criticized for being restricted because of its racial topics, but it also includes a number of adult themes, sexualized themes, and things like that. So Robert Kyle McDaniel chose to swear in on this book. It's called Homegoing. And then another board member, Carl Frisch, swore in on 5 LGBT-themed books that he said or claimed were frequently banned. And of course, some parents said, well, no, they're not exactly banned. We can still purchase those for our kids. Yeah. They're just restricted at school.
It's very funny, Michael. I saw a sticker in a bookstore window recently. It was issued by, I think, Simon & Schuster. I think I've got that right. And this independent bookseller has got the sticker in their window, and it says, "We sell banned books." So wearing this now as a badge of honor, you know, the publishing firms and some school board members are now almost trumpeting, you know, flying in the face of people's objections to this content.
Well, it seems kind of internally inconsistent to say that you can sell something that's banned. I'm not sure how that works. But
Great point.
With this one book, this fellow was sworn in on, had adult sexual themes, graphic oral and anal sex, rape, violence, and drug use. And you're replacing a holy book with this. I mean, that, and it makes a sworn oath meaningless, if not worse, profane. You know, the whole point of using a holy book in a swearing in is to add moral weight to it. Does this really add anything to it? It just seems meaningless to me.
One of the stories at readline.com this week that piqued my interest, you know, we talk a lot about people going off to four-year institutions, but what about kids that would rather learn a trade? And, you know, when I talk with Christian school parents, K through 12 Christian school parents, they often wonder, well, if my kids want to go into a trade, is there something out there that's faith-based? It's a rare thing, actually. I've looked into it a little bit myself, but in Ohio, they're doing just that.
Yeah, you're right. It is rare, but the College of St. Joseph the Worker has just received approval from the Ohio Department of Higher Education to open a new campus in Steubenville. And the first inaugural class is limited to 30 students in the fall of 2024. But they're offering a 6-year program where students are paid by year 2, so they're going to be earning money. The goal is to get them graduated debt-free. They're going to teach them about the Christian faith. So it is a Catholic school that prides itself in the Catholic intellectual tradition. But it's a trade school, and so they're going to learn or be teaching these students one of 4 trades: carpentry, electrical, plumbing, or heating and air. So these students will graduate, and within 6 years, they should be at journeyman status, which, if you know anything about the skilled trades, that's a big deal. That's where you want to get and then launch your career. But they'll also get a bachelor's degree out of it, no debt, and have a robust liberal arts education.
I love that. I interviewed a gentleman who headed up something called Tarkio Technical University, which is in northwest Missouri. And Michael, the whole premise of this, they've entered into a new phase of their teaching where, yes, they'll teach you a trade, but they have a whole business wing that they've just added now to their facility that teaches the Christian business principles of running. Rather than just learning plumbing, but learning how to run a plumbing business, if that's what you wish to do. They'll almost teach you the business angle first, and then go back and backfill with the trade lessons. I love this trend.
Yeah, I guess I want to know, does Mike Rowe know about this? I mean, this is incredible. He ought to be the dean of students here.
He should. That's great.
It's an unusual hybrid of the four-year college and trade school, which we've always kind of debated. Which should I go to? Well, why not both? I'm not sure it'll work. It's only got twice the applicants for the room that they have for students. So, yeah, I think it's going to be a huge hit. You get 3 years of study, and then followed by 3 years of apprenticeship, but you start getting paid in the second year. So, I mean, it's just a huge deal for these kids. And
in fact,
yeah.
I heard from one gentleman, he said that some business owners, you know, long-time business owners in smaller communities will often just hand their book of business over to graduates of this program. The idea being, I don't need anything, you don't even have to pay me for it. I'm retiring. I know you're coming into it of the right frame of mind and the right background. Here's the business.
We need people who know how things work.
Yes.
I mean, I can tell you, I don't know how anything works today.
Yeah, right.
And so we need to train people to know that.
Well, as we wrap up this edition of the Lion Week in Review, I always like to ask the panel their favorite articles of the week or things they'd like to call your attention to at readlion.com. Josh, what have you got this week?
Well, I'd like to give Michael an opportunity to talk about my favorite story, which was a column that he wrote, actually.
Outstanding. I heard about this.
Yeah.
Oh, go on.
So you did a little editorial this week, Michael, of your own.
It just kind of fell into place. It just fell into my heart. I was reading David McCullough's wonderful book, 1776, and he talked about Thomas Paine's Crisis in America, and I started looking at that. And it's the piece that starts with, "These are the times that try men's souls," which is famous. But there's another quote further on in the piece by Paine that talked about God and said, "Neither have I so much of the infidel in me as to suppose that he has relinquished the government of the world and given us up to the care of devils." Isn't that a great line?
It is.
And I was thinking, we need to hear that. Because if you turn on the news for any length of time right now, you feel like we've been given up to the care of devils. And at the same time, on something else, I was researching Olivia Newton-John's spirituality. I think a lot of people don't realize how spiritual she became. It was kind of a movement from Greece to grace for her. And I've got a wonderful CD of hers called Grace and Gratitude. I really recommend it. But I was looking up stuff on her spirituality, and I found an article about that on Metro Voice News, which is our friends in Lee Summit, Missouri. And then I saw another article that they had done about the Advent Pray 25 program that Jonathan Rumi, who plays Jesus in The Chosen, is pushing the Hallow app. You've seen the TV commercials for it. And I thought, wow, what a convergence of messages here that God has not given us up to the care of devils, and here's a way to find that out. Just do this praying before Christmas. So, it was kind of a Lombard Street in my mind, wavy road through Thomas Paine, Olivia Newton-John, and Jonathan Rumi to find this message. But I think it's an important one, that God has not given us up to the care of devils.
Amen. And heading into the Christmas season, I couldn't think of a more appropriate message. Good one. Michael, thank you.
Thank you.
Josh, thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. That'll do it for us this week on the Lion Week in Review. Be sure to keep up to date by reading all the latest news stories constantly breaking at readlion.com. For all of us at the Lion, thanks for downloading the show. See you next time.